The most dangerous part of a romance scam is that it doesn't start with a demand for money. It starts with something that feels significantly safer, but is actually far more lethal. It starts with attention.
Which is why people underestimate the threat. We still have this outdated image in our heads of a lone hacker in a hoodie sending poorly spelled emails from an internet cafe. But that is not what is happening. We are talking about a system. Fake profiles, scripted emotional triggers, simulated investment platforms, and a coordinated plan to drain a person completely.
And that is the paradox we need to unpack. We treat romance as the most deeply personal, spontaneous thing a human being can experience. But what we are looking at today is a global operation that has turned human connection into a supply chain.
I will put some numbers to that because the scale is hard to comprehend. We are not talking about a few bad actors. Recent cybercrime telemetry identified over 630,000 unique threat actors running romance scams. They operate with CRM software to track their victims. They work in shifts. They have sales quotas.
Which means the real story here is not that some people are gullible. It is that Western culture has inadvertently built an environment where loneliness is incredibly easy to monetize.
I want to break down how this machinery actually works, especially for anyone listening who might not be familiar with the specific platforms these groups use. In the US, the UK, or Australia, you have dating apps like Tinder or Bumble. The scammer makes contact there, but they rarely stay there. They push the victim to move the conversation to an encrypted messaging app like WhatsApp or Telegram.
And I should add, for a lot of the world, WhatsApp is just how you text your family. But in North America, moving from a dating app to an encrypted chat very quickly is a significant shift in boundaries. It creates an artificial bubble.
It isolates them. Then comes the pivot. Eventually, the scammer introduces cryptocurrency, which is digital money that can cross borders instantly and is notoriously difficult to trace.
A dating app, a private encrypted chat, a sudden crisis or a secret investment tip, and then a money transfer. If you look at the architecture of that, it is not romance. That is a pipeline.
It is a pipeline that generates over $1.3 billion a year in the US alone. And that is just what gets reported to the government.
Because the underreporting is massive. The shame involved keeps people silent. Victims look back at their own actions and think, how did I let this happen? But they are asking the wrong question. They are judging themselves against the standards of a normal relationship without realizing they were subjected to a highly coordinated psychological operation.
I look at the structure of these operations, and it reminds me of my 20s. My first job out of university was doing data analytics for a mining company in Western Australia. My entire role was building dashboards to optimize extraction rates. I would write algorithms to squeeze out another 0.5% of yield from a site, and the executives would celebrate because that meant millions in profit.
You were optimizing the extraction of iron ore.
Correct. And what I did not see, because I was sitting in an air-conditioned office in Perth, was the downstream cost. I didn't see the environmental damage or the impact on local communities. I just saw the numbers on a screen going up. When I read the reports on these modern romance scams, I saw the exact same logic. They have industrialized the extraction of money from lonely people. They are running A/B tests on affection. They are optimizing trust.
That is a chilling parallel. And it highlights why the traditional advice we give people is failing. We tell people, watch out for red flags. But the scammers are the ones designing the flags.
They know what you are looking for. Which brings us to the technology shift. Because 10 years ago, the ultimate red flag was simple. I cannot do a video call. My camera is broken.
Which was the easiest way to catch someone lying. If you claim to be a wealthy diamond merchant, but you refuse to turn on Skype or FaceTime, the victim eventually walks away.
But that verification process is broken now.
Completely broken. And this is the escalation that terrifies me. Scammers are now using deepfake technology in real-time video calls. There are services in these criminal marketplaces where an operator can pay to use real-time face-swapping software. They can blink, smile, and talk on a WhatsApp video call, and the face the victim sees is the handsome model from the dating profile.
So seeing is no longer believing.
No. The visual proof is synthetic. And I use that word deliberately. Synthetic means made by artificial processes to imitate a natural product. The video is synthetic, but the intimacy is synthetic too.
Expand on that. How do you mean?
I mean, they are using large language models, AI chatbots, to manage the conversations. One operator can maintain 50 relationships at the same time. The AI tracks everything. It remembers that your dog died last year. It remembers you prefer coffee over tea. It mirrors your vocabulary. It is engineering a sense of profound closeness that a human being would struggle to fake with 50 people simultaneously.
The amount of data they must be pulling to do that is staggering.
They pull it from everywhere. LinkedIn, Instagram, public property records. They even monitor obituaries. They actively look for people who are recently widowed, because grief creates a very specific type of vulnerability.
That crosses a line from opportunistic crime into targeted cruelty. It makes me physically uncomfortable to think about a system designed to scrape obituaries for leads.
It should make us uncomfortable. And it brings up something I experienced when I first moved to Canada from Iran. In Tehran, you learn very early that words can be factually true, but intentionally misleading. We have a concept of public language and private language. You learn to read the gap between what someone says and what they actually intend.
Code switching.
Yes, but more than that. When I arrived in Vancouver, I had to learn that Canadians use politeness to hide discomfort. Someone would say, "Let us revisit that idea later." And I would eagerly wait for the follow-up, not realizing they meant, "No, absolutely not." Language is a tool for managing reality.
I see where you are going. The scammers are weaponizing language.
They are building a prison out of vocabulary. They use words like future, security, soulmate, us against the world. They are technically just typing letters on a screen, but emotionally they are constructing a false reality that isolates the victim from their actual friends and family.
That lands. The social engineering is the weapon. But this is where I have to step in and push back on something, because we are dancing around the hardest part of this.
Go ahead.
We can talk about AI, we can talk about deep fakes, we can talk about predatory infrastructure, but at the end of the day, a bank transfer requires a signature. Taking out a second mortgage requires walking into a bank, sitting across from a loan officer, and signing a legal document.
I knew you were going to bring this back to the individual.
I have to. Because if we pretend that these victims had zero agency, if we say the manipulation was so perfect that they were basically under hypnosis, we are infantilizing adults.
I am not infantilizing anyone. I am trying to explain that a choice made inside a manipulated reality is not a clean choice.
But it is still a choice. I read about a case where a victim was warned by her own bank. The teller looked her in the eye and said, "This looks like a scam. We advise you not to send this money." And she sent it anyway. At what point does accountability rest with the person pushing the button?
Your framing is too simplistic. You are describing a person making a rational financial decision, but she is not making a financial decision. In her mind, she is making an emotional decision to save the person she loves from a crisis.
I hear that. I do. But compassion cannot mean we erase responsibility. The infrastructure is predatory. I will concede that completely. The scammers exploit human loneliness with surgical precision. But loneliness is not a free pass to ignore basic financial self-preservation. If we strip away their accountability, we are saying these people are incapable of adult judgment.
No. Pause there. Listen to what you are demanding. You want a person who has been systematically isolated from their support network, fed synthetic evidence, and subjected to a customized psychological operation to suddenly snap out of it and exercise perfect financial literacy.
Not perfect literacy. Basic skepticism.
You are missing the power of the system. I have students preparing for the IELTS exam. Some of them spend 2 years doing everything right. They study, they pay the fees, they learn the formulas, and they miss their required score by half a band because of a technicality in the grading rubric. They are devastated. They trusted a system, played by its rules, and the system shut them out anyway.
How does an English test connect to a romance scam?
Because it's about trusting the architecture. Victims of these scams see an investment platform with a beautiful user interface. They see charts. They see customer service portals. They trust it because we are conditioned in the West to trust slick digital infrastructure. The scammer uses the visual language of legitimate institutions to bypass the victim's skepticism.
Okay, I will give you that. The illusion of legitimacy is powerful. I had my own run-in with trusting the surface logic of a system. When I applied for a working holiday visa for the UK years ago, I was rejected. The caseworker deemed my $4,000 in savings insufficient.
Which is arbitrary.
Completely arbitrary. I lived in Perth. $4,000 was plenty to get me set up. But the system had a rigid metric, and I failed it. I was panicked. I assumed the British government possessed some superior logic that I simply did not understand. I assumed the system was right, and I was wrong. It took me weeks to realize. The caseworker just checked a box without looking at the context, and I eventually appealed and won.
See? You deferred to the authority of the system.
I did, and I will concede that victims defer to the authority of these fake investment platforms. But Sarina, my visa rejection did not cost me my life savings. I am willing to meet you halfway here. I agree the scammers construct a terrifyingly effective trap. But the trap works because it relies on a very human vulnerability. Greed.
Greed?
A lot of these scams transition into pig butchering crypto investments. The scammer shows the victim massive, unrealistic financial returns. I made 20% profit this week. If the victim only wanted love, they would say, "That is nice for you. Let us talk about our relationship." But they do not. They say, "Show me how to make that money." The scam requires the victim's greed to close the trap.
That is a harsh assessment.
Is it inaccurate?
I think it lacks context. You call it greed. I call it financial precarity. Who is being targeted? People in their 50s and 60s who realize their retirement savings are not enough to survive on. They are desperate for a lifeline. When someone they trust offers them a way out of that anxiety, they grab it. Calling it greed lets a broken economic system off the hook.
We are circling the same drain here. We both agree the environment is toxic.
Then let me try to reframe this entirely. because debating the victim's choices is distracting us from the larger threat. The real question is not why a lonely, financially anxious person trusted a sophisticated illusion. The real question is why we have built a society where trust can be industrialized and sold back to people as a weapon.
That is a massive shift in perspective.
It is necessary. Look at Western dating culture. Look at social media. We have trained an entire generation to evaluate human beings through screens, to swipe through faces at high speed, to build relationships purely through text. We normalized frictionless digital intimacy.
And the scammers simply weaponized the norms we already accepted.
Precisely. We built a culture that worships convenience in relationships. We want fast matches, fast chemistry, fast validation. But human trust is not supposed to be fast. It requires friction. It requires awkward silences, observing how someone treats a waiter, seeing them interact with their friends.
We stripped the friction out of dating to make it more efficient.
And efficiency is the enemy of security. When you remove the friction from human connection, you leave the door wide open for an optimized criminal enterprise to walk in.
That is the sharpest point we have hit today. The deeper insight is not that individuals are foolish. It is that our environment is optimized for frictionless intimacy, and fraud thrives in a frictionless space.
So when we ask, how did they fall for it? We are asking a small question. The scammers are just holding up a mirror to the way we have commodified human relationships.
I find that profoundly bleak. But I cannot argue with the logic. If the infrastructure of modern romance mimics a marketplace, we cannot be shocked when actual criminals treat it like a marketplace.
We have to reconsider how we approach connection entirely.
I suppose the practical takeaway for anyone navigating this is to intentionally introduce friction back into your life. If someone meets you online, attempts to pull you into a private encrypted app immediately, and starts creating emotional emergencies before you have met in the physical world, that is a structural warning.
I would add that if the connection feels flawless, that is an indicator of danger. Real closeness has texture. It involves minor disagreements. It requires pacing.
That is a fairly unromantic standard for modern dating.
Perhaps. But romance is not supposed to look like a highly calibrated sales funnel.
That is a brutal line.
It is a survival mechanism. The best way to protect yourself is not to become paranoid and cynical about everyone you meet. It is simply to stay slow enough to notice when somebody is turning your desire for connection into a business model.
Trust should have a pace. If someone tries to outrun your judgment, that is not passion, that is pressure.
And pressure is exactly what a scam looks like when it is dressed up as affection.
I think we have to leave the argument there, because that summarizes the threat perfectly. But before we wrap up the episode, Sarina, there is a specific cultural phrase we need to highlight for our listeners who are studying advanced English, because it appears constantly in the reporting on this issue.
Yes, and by the way, if you have been hearing the phrase love bombing a lot lately in Western media or psychology podcasts, this story is exactly why.
It sounds like a positive thing on the surface.
It does, but it means the exact opposite. Love bombing means overwhelming someone with intense affection, compliments, and promises of a future very early in a relationship. It is a manipulation tactic designed to make the victim emotionally dependent before they have time to evaluate the person objectively.
It is a fiction deployed as a weapon.
It is. And understanding that phrase gives you a lens into how these scams actually function. They do not start with a request for money. They start with a love bomb.
If this episode made you rethink how language is used to manipulate trust, you need to download our free starter pack in the description below. Learn the exact phrases you can use to politely challenge a false narrative before you get caught in one. Until next time.